Hello, I'm Jessica Amir for the Finance News Network. Joining me from Opthea is Managing Director and CEO, Dr. Megan Baldwin. Megan, thanks for coming and welcome.
Thanks, Jess.
For new investors, just give us a quick introduction to the company.
We are focused on developing novel therapies for the treatment of eye disease. We have a lead drug candidate in development, which we call OPT302, and we're developing it for the treatment of two eye diseases. The first one being wet AMD, or wet age-related macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of blindness in people aged over the age of 55. And the second indication is diabetic macular edema, or DME, which is the leading cause of blindness in people with diabetes. We currently have two clinical trials that are ongoing, a large phase 2B clinical study in wet AMD patients and a phase 1B/2A clinical trial in diabetic macular edema patients. Importantly, both of those diseases have a unmet medical need. There's only two approved therapies, so a limited therapeutic option for those patients. And we are developing one of the very promising new drugs that may actually improve vision in those patients that suffer from that debilitating eye disease.
Now to a little more on wet AMD. Just tell us about the disease.
So wet AMD, or wet age-related macular degeneration, is a disease of the aging process that affects the back of the eye. And what happens in that disease process is that there's too many vessels that grow at the back of the eye, and as they grow, they're highly leaky. So there's fluid, there's vessels, and that can trigger inflammation, fibrosis and scarring. And if it's left untreated, it leads to a chronic and often a very rapid decline in vision, which is generally in the centre of the visual field, and this is the region of the eye that's required for highly detailed focused vision.
Now tell us about the trial.
We're conducting it in 10 countries around the world, 8 countries in Europe, the US as well as Israel. It will enrol 351 patients, and importantly, it's a randomised controlled clinical study. So we're testing OPT302 in addition with the standard of care therapy for wet AMD, which is referred to as Lucentis. And we're going to compare the vision in those patients to those patients that receive Lucentis on its own. So what we're really looking for is whether we can see an additive benefit of adding OPT302 to the existing standard of care. And if we can demonstrate that in a phase 2B clinical trial that is robustly powered as we have designed it, that's going to be a major clinical event for the company and a real indicator that we have a very promising drug indeed.
And what are the outcomes of the trial, and when can we expect data?
We're dosing patients for 6 months, and what we're looking for there as a primary readout is the change in vision in those patients that receive the combination OPT302 therapy compared to the standard of care therapy alone. But in addition to measuring vision improvements, what we are also looking at is the anatomical parameters of the eye. So how thick is the retina? How much fluid can we resolve at the back of the eye? And all of those secondary outcomes are also very important that may also signal the type of activity that our drug has to treat the debilitating eye disease of wet AMD. We expect the primary data outcome for the phase 2B study to be reported early in 2020.
Now can you tell us about your diabetic macular edema program?
So diabetic macular edema is a disease that also affects the back of the eye. It is the leading cause of blindness in the diabetic population. So you can imagine how many people, millions of people, suffer from this form of blindness that's associated with diabetes. And what happens in that disease is that elevated glucose levels actually trigger vessels to grow and become highly leaky. So there's a swelling at the back of the eye that's characterised by fluid. And what our drug does when we inject it into the eyes of patients is blocks signals that are involved in making those vessels leak. And so we hope to block that leakage process and actually resolve fluid, and therefore have our drug improve vision in patients that suffer from diabetic macular edema. We have an ongoing study in DME right now. It is a phase 1B/2A clinical trial. We hope to enrol 117 patients, and we're recruiting patients from the United States as well as Australia. And the primary outcome of that clinical study is to look for the response rate in patients. So we're looking for those patients that receive the combination therapy and actually respond over and above what we would expect with Eylea on its own, which is a VEGF-A inhibitor.
A question about financials. Drug development typically requires deep pockets. So what are your funding requirements?
So as I said, we've got 2 clinical trials ongoing right now, and we are fully funded through the outcomes of those studies. So we're fully funded through 2020 and the readout of the phase 2B wet AMD and the phase 1B/2A study in diabetic macular edema. At the end of April, we finished with approximately 37 million Australian dollars cash in bank. And together with the R&D tax rebate, as I said, we have enough cash in order to execute upon the clinical studies and read out the data from those studies.
And lastly, Megan, why should investors consider adding Opthea to their portfolio?
We have one of the most exciting and promising drug development programs in development right now. We have a quality data set that we've generated with our first in-human clinical study that we reported in April 2017. That was a very good-sized phase 1/2A clinical trial of 51 patients. And we generated real quality data demonstrating biological activity of our molecule. We also demonstrated, very importantly, that the drug is safe when it's injected into the eye. So we have been able to execute upon that positive data. We've raised $45 million cash in 2017, and it's really been backed by a large number of institutional healthcare investors from around the world, and many of those investors have done deep due diligence on our molecule. So they're aware of the potential of the molecule, they're aware of the market and the commercial potential for a drug if we can demonstrate additional clinical benefit or vision improvement in patients when they receive OPT-302.
Well, Dr. Megan Baldwin, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you very much.